Welcome to Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. On this podcast, we bring the conversation to you, sharing engaging stories that motivate and build consensus in the nonprofit community. This podcast is about the innovators, the leaders on the front lines of adversity, guiding lights in the nonprofit industry affecting change. And through their stories, we can all join forces to become Civic Warriors.
Hey Warriors, welcome to today's episode of Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. I'm your host, Brad Caruso, leader of Witham's not-for-profit practice. Today's guest is Joe Holman, Sustainability and ESG Services Practice Leader here at Witham and President of VEXAS Foundation. The VEXAS Foundation is a 501c3 charitable nonprofit organization that aims to improve the lives of patients with VEXAS syndrome. The VEXAS Foundation has three goals: raising awareness, exploring better ways to manage its symptoms, and ultimately discovering pathways to a cure. Through research, disease awareness, and a greater scientific understanding, the VEXAS Foundation strives to make a positive impact on the lives of people living with VEXAS syndrome. So with that said, and we're going to learn a little bit more about VEXAS itself and the work that Joe's doing. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I always like starting out. Tell us a little about yourself. Talk about why you took on the foundation, how you got there, and some of the work you're doing, and why this cause is relevant to you.
Okay. Yeah, let me get into it. I have a little story behind it. You know, I know somebody very close, or could be me, who was diagnosed about 5 or 6 years ago with lupus. And this was like 16, 17. And if anyone knows about lupus, it's kind of one of those autoimmune diseases that are a little fuzzy in terms of the diagnosis. Time goes on, things changed, and they were suspecting that probably it wasn't lupus. And a very astute hematologist decided to run a test in 2023 and identified it as VEXAS. And I'll talk about VEXAS later, but the journey kind of this is really germane to why I got into it. I then had what's known as a VEXAS flare, and that kind of put me into the hospital. And I went to a major hospital in New York City, and they knew nothing about VEXAS. And in fact, the people that were caring for me went on Google that evening to figure out what the heck it was and how to treat it. And they had no idea. And eventually, I was able to connect with a research doctor who discovered VEXAS, and he provided them with the correct treatment. Originally, they were going to go down one road, which was not a good road, and this doctor was able to jump in and tell them this is the right way to go, and the treatment was successful, and I came out, and since then, he's been able to, maintain myself on a nice, stable pathway. But during that time, I saw, what a cluster the medical profession was in terms of VEXAS, because they knew nothing about it. And you never want to go into a hospital when they're Googling what you have to see what it says. So that was kind of where I got into it. And then if you know who I am, I'm looking at what the doctor has on his website, looking how he's bringing out awareness. And I go, Dr. Beck, you got to have, tell more people about it. You got to get out there and do it. And he goes, well, we have this website, but no one's really monitoring it. To get contributions in, you had to mail a check, but no one ever opened up the checks. So that was a real problem. So it was kind of this defunct foundation and just failed to launch. And he goes, Joe, why don't you take on that foundation? So he just kind of gave us so Joe, why don't you do it? Here it is, all the paperwork. It's done all the registration. It just hasn't raised any money or done anything. So that was in April of this year. I became self-imposed president. And I was charged to then move forward with it. So that's kind of how I got into it, by, looking at what the need is in the medical world, having a firsthand view of, what happens when the people aren't aware of what's going on. And then obviously I learned more about the disease and treatment and everything else going forward, and working with this guy, Dr. Beck, who just want to say he's the lead scientist. He discovered VEXAS, and he's over at NYU.
Oh, convenient. Yeah, right in town.
So convenient.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that personal story as well as a little bit more. I know in our first discussions, I never heard of VEXAS itself, and it does, it seems like a relatively rare disease, but one that affects many people. So although rare, it still affects a significant number of people. And you also mentioned a couple important things, which we're going to get into, which is talking a little bit more about what it's like to get thrust into being a president of a foundation and the fun that goes along with that. But I guess before we get into that, I know you tabled it a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about VEXAS itself, because I think it's relevant to understand the work you're doing, to understand what the actual disease is and how it affects people. So maybe share a little bit more about your knowledge on it, and what you've learned in your experience.
Well, first of all, VEXAS is a terrible name, but it's an acronym too. I mean, VEXAS is like this harsh word that no one really likes to hear. I wish they could have come up with something a little.
It's like LexisNexis.
Yeah, Lexus maybe. Actually, this is a funny thing that when I first did this and put it together on one of the web distribution sites for mailing lists, MailChimp, I believe it was, they actually blocked me because they thought it was VEXAS. If you took away the couple of the word, you can get another word on it that looks like I'm putting out pornographic messages. I had to go on to and explain to them, no, this is for medical, and they had to go to my website and clear me. So anyway, early on problem, but solved. But anyway, VEXAS is an acronym which you have to look up, and it's really much too long for this discussion. But what it is, well, go into how many people are affected. There's about 1 million people worldwide, they estimate, that are affected by VEXAS. And probably 999,000 of them are not diagnosed with VEXAS. So it's one of those mostly misdiagnosed diseases out there, where we ran a survey actually, and it was like 76% of the people were misdiagnosed initially, including myself, where we didn't really get the right diagnosis. And the problem with it is what is VEXAS? VEXAS is an autoimmune disease. It's caused by a breakdown in the UA1 gene. And the UA1 gene creates this enzyme, and this enzyme goes out into your bloodstream, and it's created inside your bone marrow. So that's the source of it. And it goes out and cleans up all of removes like the failed to launch red blood cells, the immature blood cells, the broken blood cells. And you think about it, it's like a garbage truck. It goes along and takes it all out of the blood. And that's what it does on a healthy person. And each one of your stem cells in your body create that enzyme. So in VEXAS, a few of the stem cells don't create it, and a few more don't create it. And over time, more and more don't create it. And without that enzyme, you get more and more junk piling up in your blood. And if you know about autoimmune disease, that type of thing becomes an irritant. Irritants cause inflammation. And inflammation is the biggest problem we have in the medical profession. And the inflammation then hits different people different ways in VEXAS. And that's the real confusing part. So inflammation could hit you in your lungs and organs. So all of a sudden you'll have issues breathing. It could affect your blood count, though most people do have issues with anemia, with low white blood cell count, with low platelets. But it could also come out on your skin, look like skin rashes, or one of the many of the dermatology issues that people have these days. You get headaches. In fact, we actually created, there's a picture on our website that you could see called the VEXAS Man, which has like 25 different things that can come out. And they all mimic a lot of other diseases. So generally speaking, when you have VEXAS, you're going to be diagnosed with maybe MDS, which is like a pre-cancer type of thing. You'll be diagnosed with maybe suspected cancer. You'll be diagnosed with eczema or a bunch of other different types of autoimmunes. And that's what happens. And that's kind of the story behind VEXAS, is that because of those misdiagnoses, the people don't get proper treatment over time. And the one thing I failed to mention is that VEXAS affects primarily men over 50. So you're dealing with an older population. And the older population that are affected and identified the time it comes around, because as I said, it's only a few stem cells in the beginning and a few more and a few more and a few more. So say if at 55 you start to get it, it's also not hereditary. It's just pops out of the blue. And, maybe you're 70 years old and all of a sudden now you're getting a VEXAS flare. And that's quite fatal when you're very old. And then the doctor doesn't know what it is. So now those 2 or 3 years go by and you're 75 years old and you've been mistreated for those 5 years. You might have organ damage and other things happening. So, and that's what gives VEXAS a very high fatality rate. If you go online and believe Google, it's a 50% fatality rate after 5 years of diagnosis. And that's the resulting of misdiagnosed old people that are very sick. So that's kind of how it works. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Well, how does it? Yeah. So I guess just so dovetailing off that. So obviously, one of the challenges with, disease diagnosis is, there's multiple diseases in the world, and obviously the correct diagnosis leads to the correct treatment. So, how does the medical profession right now, and obviously some of the work you're doing is with respect to education as well as, funding for research and things like that. What is the current, process for ultimately treating it now? Is there a treatment? Is there an FDA drug? Is there a, mechanism by which there is a proper treatment for it, or there is a road to recovery, I should say?
It's kind of a hit or miss type of thing that's going on right now. There's no FDA approval on any particular drug. So it's treated for using anti-inflammatory drugs. And the number one drug is prednisone. We all know prednisone. Anyone that has an autoimmune disease loves prednisone. It's a great drug in the short term. It's quite poisonous over the long term in terms of what it does to your skeletal system, what it does to other parts of your body. So the problem is that's probably the only very effective treatment for VEXAS. There are other treatments that they try that are considered off-the-shelf treatments, which I found to be an interesting term, where it's not FDA approved, but they kind of bring it in as a treatment to help reduce the amount of prednisone that you're taking. Like there's a drug, Actemra, that is out there. There's this AZA chemo drug that's available that's actually very painful in terms of it's like a 7-shot course of needles every month over a course of 8 or 9 months. And they think that perhaps that will bring VEXAS down to almost zero in your blood. But VEXAS was discovered in 2020. So they don't have a lot of research on it. And the only places that they're doing research or significant research is at NYU, NIH, which is the National Health Organization of the United States. And in Paris, there's a very large VEXAS research facility there. There's a little bit of work going on at Mayo Clinic. And then there's a lot of doctors that are curious about it and doing it on their own. So they have their own little practice on it, but it's not very widespread. So the only real research, though, that you'll find, is at NYU, NIH, and Paris. There is no cure, as I mentioned, and there is no FDA approval. And they're trying to work up a pathway forward in terms of coming up with what is a successful treatment program that cannot include prednisone. That is the ultimate goal. Keep your flares down, monitor the disease, limit adverse consequences, and really think about the patient's experience, their quality of life. That's a big issue where what is the patient's experience? And that is how they judge outcomes in terms of, certainly from an FDA approval standpoint. Now, today, we know that there's several drug companies that are interested in VEXAS. So because we're at the foundation, we're able to talk to these drug companies under NDAs and give them our views on patient experience and patient outcomes. Because the FDA is looking for approval to have what is the patient outcome of a drug test. So they do a drug test and the patient outcome has to be that the person's able to run a mile or go to work every day or something positive. Not they don't use prednisone anymore, which makes coming up with the patient outcomes much more difficult. However, they're all looking for this FDA approval because they see that the marketplace is much larger than it appears to be. So again, no real cure out there. Prednisone is definitely the problem. And at the foundation, we're trying to do one of the things. We put together a Facebook page, and this Facebook page has about 400 people on it. Now, and think of it like Yelp, where people kind of chime in and says, well, I'm doing this. I have this medical, this is me on VEXAS, and this is the treatment program I'm having, and it's working. Or I'm having this problem, and I have this flare, or I have this skin rash. Is it VEXAS? And everyone kind of gets together and says, well, this is working. And then it gets the popular treatment of the day. And you get a lot of people then want to then go to their doctors and say, we want this treatment because everybody on Facebook says to do it, which I find it kind of novel as a way to generate.
I think it's great and it's dangerous. It's great because people are sharing information on something that there may not be, as you mentioned, there's not formalized cure or treatment plan that has been, proven and approved. It's also dangerous because, as you said, if people are posting pictures of rashes, hey, what do I have? I'd be like, I don't know if I want to find out.
Yeah, where have you been? What it does, though, give people a lot of comfort in terms of being able to talk to somebody about it, because typically you can't speak to anybody because no one knows what VEXAS is. They're like, oh, really? What is that anyway? And then people get tired of explaining what the disease or what the diagnosis is. But it is dangerous, but it's positive. It serves a purpose. The problem is the studies that are out there, the meta studies on VEXAS involve so few patients. Like some of the largest ones have 50 or 60 patients. And I think only 400 patients have been clinically studied with VEXAS. So it's a big difference in terms of there's not a lot of data, not a lot of good raw science. And that's what, as a foundation, we're trying to build up, is create that runway to find what that pathway is for not necessarily cure initially, but just for a better treatment program that will improve the lives of the people that are suffering from VEXAS until there is a cure.
So, Joe, appreciate sharing more information about VEXAS, appreciate sharing some personal information and things that are really going to help people, especially for those that are unaware. And I think a lot of this podcast brings awareness to things like this. This is a disease that often goes undiagnosed or maybe is newer, as you mentioned. So, obviously in your world, you're working for a foundation. You're, certainly going through the trials and tribulations of running a foundation, which is certainly not easy to do. Maybe share a little bit with us, as many of our audience in the not-for-profit world, is always curious how people run their organizations, what struggles they come across so they can learn from them. As you're, building this charity from the ground up, what did you learn about, running a charitable organization from this experience? What are some takeaways that you have from that?
I mean, a real important part of it was governance. And that was the first thing I brought into the foundation. And I started it by myself, so I was the only one there. So the first thing I did was get a board and find a group of individuals that shared the same vision that I had. The problem with the original founding of this particular foundation was the people that founded it didn't have the same vision, and they fought. And because of that, nothing happened. So by me thinking ahead and looking for people that shared my vision, finding credible people that also had some of the same experiences, not necessarily diagnosed with VEXAS, but understood it or had a family member, I was able to create a strong board of people. So myself, I have 4 other people on the board to help manage the foundation. And I think that's the first step you need to have. And a good tax exempt or a good foundation starts with strong governance. And just like a regular company, you need to have, a structure in place. You need to have quarterly board meetings. You need to have processes, procedures in place to operate the foundation. And the second thing I went into, and I think is very important, is to create a clear mission statement. What am I going to do as a foundation? How am I going to accomplish the goals that I set for myself? What are the KPIs? So how do I measure the success of my activities in reaching the goals that I've set for myself for the foundation? So those are really important areas that I focused on. So we came up with very clear and concise goals in terms of educating individuals, educating the medical profession, helping find a viable treatment programs, helping develop a cure, and by funding research. And that was the crux of our foundation. And then going forward, you're thinking about, research. Research is in the millions and millions of dollars through grants, but grants don't cover everything. And the foundation is able to create discretionary contributions to research scientists to actually fill in the holes where grants don't cover. So if they need a particular machine, they want to run a particular test, they want to attend a conference, they want to do something, bring an extra person on the payroll that's not necessarily affiliated with a grant. They can do all of that by having discretionary spending and not necessarily have to include that in a grant program. So recognizing all that, that was sort of how I structured my foundation, how I, working with a great group of board members, were able to kind of get out there create product that can help raise awareness. And if I have a moment, I can go into a couple of our strategies.
I appreciate you sharing. I think corporate governance is often overlooked when people join nonprofit boards. And also, people forget that, boards are governed, they're not owned by anybody. So, one voice, if there's 5 board members, there's only one voice and all, 4 people disagree. It certainly creates challenges in finding synergy. So I really appreciate that you, not only kind of like valued and put in place the corporate governance, the policies and procedures, but also you said, hey, we need a mission statement we're going to get behind and we're all going to work towards that. And, you didn't have to say this, but I bet the message too is if you're not going to get behind this, then you probably shouldn't be on our board.
That's sort of the way it works. Everyone needs to you don't run it as a dictator. You run it as a collective of everyone's got an opinion. But yes, you create that mission statement and that is the way we go forward. But the value of the mission statement is then you can think about what can we do as a foundation with the resources we have to be able to accomplish those goals. So one is to raise awareness and improve people's lives that have VEXAS. So the first thing we did was we ran a patient survey. We call it the patient experience. And we sent it out to a couple hundred people. We have about 40 people that responded. And we saw a very clear pattern that most of the people there, as I mentioned earlier, were misdiagnosed. They all believed uniformly that had they had a proper testing, and testing for VEXAS is simply a genetic test where you can pinpoint exactly whether you have VEXAS or not. It's a binary type of test that they would have been treated sooner, better, faster, and they would have had less side problems. And so coming up with that, we also found that the medical profession doesn't understand VEXAS, and there was a lot of misunderstanding of what it is, and there needs to be a lot of education for the medical professionals. And because there's not a lot of information out there on VEXAS, the patients need a lot of information. So what we've done is we've created, or we're in the process of creating, something called VEXAS 101, which is a medical resource guide for medical professionals to give them an idea of what to look for in VEXAS, how to do testing, and really who to call and ask for if they have additional questions within the medical community. And for patients, because we're not going to write it at the highest level, and give them an idea of what to expect in terms of treatment options, in terms of what testing is, what their experience is going to be going forward. And what makes these two types of initiatives interesting is that because of the age of internet, because of the age of social media, it costs very little to be able to go out and run a survey. It costs very little to be able to create a booklet online and publish it online because you don't have the mailing costs, you don't have the publication costs. So with our limited resources, we're able to go out there and affect hundreds of people because with our resource guide, we can have VEXAS patients delivered to the doctors and medical centers that they're working with. And that would be our deliverable method. And they'll then become educated and so on and so forth, so that we can have a very large group of people being educated on VEXAS, becoming aware of it at a very low cost. And then we're able to then focus our money on VEXAS research and delivering it to research groups who can use it to really help find a cure. And we want people, it's right, we have pathway to a cure. Now we're saying you want to be part of the cure, be part of the solution. And by tying it all together like that in a bow, you're then able to really come up with, how am I making a difference as a foundation? Well, I'm educating hundreds of people, and I can count those numbers of medical centers that I'm educating. I can count the dollars I give to the research centers, and I can show the number of lives that I'm impacting in terms of educating patients, not just the medical people, on what VEXAS is. And that's our mission statement. And one other byproduct of it is by educating these people, VEXAS becomes more predominant in terms of people's minds. More testing is done. So more people are identified with VEXAS. And then the more people are identified, the more interested pharma gets involved. Because pharma will solve any particular disease if there's enough, return for them. So they'll see a lot more patients have VEXAS. They'll see a lot more business opportunity, and they'll invest more money. And because it's such a distinct, easily identified type of autoimmune disease, where I'm certain, even though I'm a CPA, and this is just my belief, that they could figure out a way to get this enzyme into the blood to clean up the junk, the dead or the misfiring red blood cells so that we no longer have VEXAS in our bodies. So that's sort of, I think we're really on that path. And that's why I'm really proud of what I've been able to put together. And I'm proud of what, the support I'm getting from my board in terms of doing this work.
Yeah, we really appreciate the work you're doing for the world. I mean, the first time you and I connected about this, I had never heard of this. Obviously, it affects, people, many people. And, raising awareness to these types of causes is a significant element, especially in the case of an early known disease, because obviously, as you said, maybe only a few people know about it if the medical community isn't very well aware of diagnosing it because it's so new and so, not in the limelight of some of the other diseases and issues that are out there. You raising awareness and taking that stand, both, resurrecting a charity, right? So, there's multiple layers here. It's not just you're educating, but you have to run an organization too, which you're doing, plus educating people, plus connecting and bringing in dollars to fund research, plus connecting all these people together. And it's a very valiant effort that I think a lot of people, don't always see all the work that goes into it. And by the way, I imagine this is probably your volunteer job too, right? You have a day job?
I have the day job, as you know. But, I have to say, one of the things that I really benefit from is the fact, being in business, this is what we do for business. This is how we advise our clients in terms of how to operate a company, any type of company in the charitable organizations, no different than a not-for-profit. Instead of we don't have a net profit, we have, a net result from our activities. So I think that business discipline has really allowed me to do what I've accomplished, what I was able to accomplish. But yeah, this is my weekend job.
It's a lot of work, but we appreciate what you're doing for the world. So, in our recent conversations as well, you mentioned you had a fundraising event recently, and I said I was going to ask you about it. You had was it a wine event that occurred?
Yeah, it was my first time I ever ran it.
Tell us about your fundraising. Tell us about your charitable event experience.
Yeah. So anyway, it was my first one. I made a lot of mistakes. I tried to do like a 50-50 raffle, and I couldn't quite figure out how to do like the Venmo versus just how to collect the money from the people, because nobody has money in their pocket anymore. You have to do it through Venmo, and I couldn't get Venmo to work. And so anyway, our 50-50 wasn't really that great. And we did a wine tasting, and that went out very well, but people really liked to drink wine. So I think it went from wine tasting to just drinking a lot of wine. But we had 35 people attend. I did it at the Centurion Club in New York City, and they were really gracious they gave me a nice discount in terms of the cost of the venue, which was a spectacular venue on the 55th floor with beautiful views. We had Daniel Boulou, the famous restaurateur, show up for pictures with everybody in the group. So, we were able to have our celebrity chef there. And it was a great time. It was 3 hours. We were able to raise over $10,000 after paying, the expenses for the wine that everybody drank. So it was a lot of fun. I think that, next year, what I would do differently is open it up to a much bigger crowd. I think that I would need to have almost somebody responsible for going out and trying to getting people to attend the event, because it's a lot of work trying to run and set up an event. So I do with them, I do that type of work. I don't do it myself. We have a whole marketing team that does it, and I kind of appreciate a lot more of the work they put into it when I ask them to go say, let's have an event, and I show up and it's all done. I guess there's a lot of work that goes into it before that. So yeah, but it was really successful as a first one, and everyone's hoping to and looking forward to doing it again next year.
Love it. Yeah, it sounds like you should be recruiting a marketing professional to your board. That's what it sounds like to me.
What we need.
That's what you need. Time, treasure, and talent, work, wisdom, and wealth. Those are the three tenets of getting people on your board. You need someone who's going to do the work, someone who's going to bring the knowledge, and someone who's going to bring the checkbook.
Yes, we need we have a lot of that, but we definitely need a marketing specialist that probably pretty young that knows social media, because that's another area that I have no idea about it.
Well, anyone out there looking to volunteer on a board, is a great opportunity if you have some talent with social media, marketing, and assistance. So Joe's looking for someone. Please chime in. Yeah. And I guess what's next for the foundation? What do you have in the short term horizon that you're looking to accomplish?
Now, the big thing is this VEXAS 101 and getting that out there. We really want to activate a lot of the individuals, want to participate. They want to come up with, how can I help the foundation? Because they see, what the cause that we're trying to support. They understand what we're trying to do, and they all want to help us. And the easiest thing for them to do is go out and spread the word. So for 2025, we're going to finalize this book, create it professionally, and then have them go out and distribute it to their rheumatologist, dermatologist, and hematologist, and say that this is something that you should look for. And if you see these signs, test. And these are testing centers and ways to test that, they're accessible to you and payable by insurance. And then the testing actually isn't even that expensive. So our big goal for 2025 is to significantly increase the rate of testing for individuals that have weird types of autoimmune symptoms in line with VEXAS. And if we could do that, we accomplished our goal. And in 2026, we'll probably be working a lot, hopefully, with pharmaceutical companies on their clinical trials for FDA-approved drugs. And so we'll go, from there, we'll see what happens.
Love it. Love it. So, I always like to ask the question and want to, obviously you've shared a lot of your time with us. You put a lot of energy into this, but you're not alone. The world's out there, and there's a lot of people that may not have been affected by this yet, or have family members that are affected currently or may be affected. How from your perspective currently, how can the public help you? Both where can people obtain more information? Because I know you publish a lot of good information, as well as how do you think, where would you need help from a foundation perspective?
I mean, the big thing is spread the word. And if people come across people that have autoimmune issues and they have an MDS and they have low immunity, have them look at our website, see, do these symptoms lay in line? I mean, we're not offering medical advice, but we're saying, does this qualify something that the doctor should do a $300 test, see if I have VEXAS or not? And that's the type of numbers we're looking at. So in the public, obviously donations are always great, but I think that from our standpoint, from my viewpoint, what's really valuable is having awareness among the medical profession and awareness among the patients that are affected or may be affected by it, because that type of awareness will then bring money that we can't ever raise and compete against the pharmaceutical companies who will spend millions and millions of dollars to find an FDA-approved drug. Now, we can grease the wheels, and I think the general public, by helping again raise awareness by asking the doctor, did you think about this? If you have these types of things, will help us in the long run raise that money from the pharmaceutical companies, who will be the ones ultimately finding that cure, or at least paying for that cure.
Love it. And how would someone access the website? I know you have a website, a pretty nice looking website. What's the address there?
It's VEXAS.org, and there's an email, info@vex.org on the website, and actually that email goes directly to my email. So if you send an email to that particular email account, I'll get it directly. And I typically respond to all emails within 24 hours. So anyone has questions, comments, they want to help out, they want to get involved, or they just, want to learn more about VEXAS, please send me an email to info@vexas.org.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, Joe, really appreciate this. I think you've shared some wisdom to the world. We've shared some knowledge. We've shared information about the foundation, hoping we can get some supporters out there, as well as just, as you said, continuing to share the knowledge and raise awareness to this, and really just continue to expand on individuals getting diagnosis in this direction that can, ultimately long-term lead to further research, finding a cure, and finding better ways to service them. And, you're a little modest, for those that have never met Joe, he's a very, very fun guy to talk to, as well as he's our sustainability and ESG practice leader. So, on top of his side job here, which is volunteering, he's also very committed to other verticals in the world that really do help the world. And so, I would define you as a true civic warrior from that perspective, and really appreciate that you've spent the time with me, spent the time to share this message, and really appreciate you joining the show today, Joe.
Thank you, Brad, for having me. Appreciate it.
No doubt. No doubt. And warriors out there, thank you for listening. Please subscribe and meet us right back here for another episode with Civic Warriors. Thank you all, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.